y'all doing out there? Not gonna lie to you guys. I slept. That's what I did today. I slept. I went to bed late. Far too late. Maybe I had a couple of drinks. You can't prove a thing. You can't prove a goddamn thing. And so I slept and slept and slept today. And so I've got a little pug now that's all full of energy. He'll probably make an appearance at some point during the show. And yeah, today's news is, as always, the disaster unfolds, right? The disaster unfolds upon us. We're just constantly waiting, constantly watching as the society continues its collapsing decline towards entropy. I wanted to start with this article because I feel like what we're seeing now is an attempt by the capitalist death cult, while this collapse occurs around us, to create counter narratives. And the counter narrative that they've been focusing on over and over and over again is a shift away from systemic issues, shift away the conversation from looking at systems and the collapse and the abandonment that is occurring systemically across the nation, and a refocus on the individual. That's been their grift for a while now. Don't even acknowledge that there are systems. Don't even acknowledge what's going on. Don't even acknowledge that the obvious, gigantic, massive institutions and structures that exist in the society are failing. Don't even acknowledge that. The problem is you, right? And an article like this, I think, does a really good job of subtly reinforcing this concept that the problem is you, right? The problem is you. The real story behind America's population bomb. Adults want their independence. For much of our history, most humans lived far more perilous lives than we live today. Our challenge is less about our material conditions and more about our mindset. Right? It's right in the sub paragraph. Our challenge is less about our material conditions and more about our mindset. You're gonna see some really fun interpretations of some data here, right? Declining birth rates are a major concern for the United States and many countries around the world. So we, an expert in existential psychology and an expert in pulsing public opinion, surveyed the Americans choosing not to have children to learn the reasons why. Americans are having fewer children than are needed to keep population numbers stable. Low birth rates are not only an American problem, right? So you got to make sure that everybody knows this isn't just an American problem, right? This isn't just an American problem. This is happening all across the world, is what they'll say, right? This is a global phenomenon. That's what they'll say, ignoring that it's not a global phenomenon. It's a capitalist phenomenon, because the purpose is to deflect away from the system, right, and onto the individual. And so you begin the conversation by saying, oh, this is happening all across the world, right? So it's like a natural phenomenon of some kind. In 2020, researchers at the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation projected that the global fertility rate will drop below 1.7 by the end of the century. And countries such as Italy, capitalist, South Korea, capitalist, Spain, capitalist, and Thailand, capitalist, will lose more than half their population within the lifetimes of children being born this year. Seems to me like it's a capitalist issue, right? I didn't hear Vietnam, China, Laos. I didn't hear those countries listed, but okay. Fear of not just climate change and affordable housing. Much of the conversation in the United States about this issue has focused on fears about the future of the world or major economic challenges. For instance, the threat of climate change and the affordability of housing are frequently referenced as reasons that Americans don't want to have kids. While those are concerns, of course, when you look at the data, family planning appears to be influenced more by people's personal views about the independent life they want to live than their worries about potential environmental or economic issues. This has important implications for how we as a nation approach the demographic challenge of declining birth rates. Specifically, we surveyed a representative sample of just over 1,000 U.S. adults about their future family planning. Of those without children, about half, 52%, do not want to have a child in the future, while 20% remain unsure. So really, really think about that number from the outset, right? If you don't have a kid, 50% of us say we don't want a kid. 20% are like, I don't know, right? So that's 70% of the populace that's on the kind of negative side of having kids, with only 30% of the populace saying that they even want to have a kid, right? Hey, Mystic, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. When we asked these individuals whether their decision to not have children was influenced by a wide range of factors, only 28% of them reported that climate change influenced their decision to not have kids. Similarly, only 33% indicated that housing prices influenced their decision. Other factors we asked about influencing the political situation in the United States, 31%, safety concerns, 31%, personal financial situation, 46%, and work-life balance, 40%, were endorsed by less than half of respondents. The only factor that the majority, 54% of Americans who don't want to have kids endorsed as influencing their decision was maintaining personal independence. So my perspective immediately, and we're going to see what their perspective is very quickly, is obviously, if I'm in a systemic collapse, if I'm watching institutions systemically betray the populace and extract as much wealth out of the populace as it possibly can, right? That it collapses all around us. I want to be able, I don't want the responsibility of a child, right? I don't want to have responsibility for the life of this being while going through a systemic collapse, right? That's how I interpret that. That, yeah, obviously, like personal financial situation, work-life balance, right? All these sorts of things are going to play. But at the end of the day, yes, I think being an independent person, not having responsibility for the life of a child during a systemic collapse of a society, yeah, absolutely that influences my decision. So what do they have to say about it? Since respondents were able to indicate multiple reasons for not having kids, we also asked them which of those factors most influenced their decision, further suggesting that this decision is more about personal preferences than other factors, right? It's not a response to a systemic collapse, right? It's not a response to a systemic collapse. It's your personal freedom, right? It's your personal inclination. That's what it is, right? So it's about you. It's not a response to a systemic collapse. It's about your own personal opinions about how you want to live your life, during a systemic collapse. We found that maintaining personal independence was reported as the most influential factor for more respondents than any other factor. 43% of those who considered independence to be a factor indicated that it was the most influential reason for not having kids. Yeah, again, because during a systemic collapse, you don't also want to have responsibility for a child. For comparison, only 26% of those who considered climate change when deciding whether to have children were reporting that it was the most influential reason, and only 9% of those who considered housing prices indicated as such. Americans may have multiple reasons for opting out of parenting, but their desire for personal independence is the most powerful one. It's also worth noting that men and women were generally similar in their reason, 53% of females, 55% of males. No other reason for not having kids was cited by a majority of men or women. We shouldn't oversimplify the story, although you are, of why more and more Americans are choosing not to start families. It is undoubtedly complex and involves facets that the public opinion surveys can't fully capture. However, our results have important implications for cultural and political discussions around the issue. Perhaps most important, our findings suggest that public policy solutions are unlikely to have much impact on birth rates. Here we go. Here's the crux, right? Because we've got to protect the system. We've got to make sure that you're the issue, right? It's your desire for personal freedom and personal independence in the middle of a systemic collapse, which they'll never say. And moreover, there is no systemic solution. There is no systemic solution. If we put in a basic income, if we created a stable society, if we increased wages, if we raised the minimum wage, if we raised taxes on the wealthy, if we attempted to tackle the idea that a billionaire should exist at all, if we had attempted to tackle any of this, none of that's going to matter, right? Do not address the collapsing system. That's what these people are saying. Because Americans who are opting, and listen to the mental gymnastics of this, because Americans who are opting out of having children are more influenced by their desire to maintain their personal independence than concerns about climate change or affordable housing or other issues such as work-life balance and safety, efforts to promote a more pro-natal society will need to be more cultural in nature. So it's your fault. It's your fault. Ignore the collapsing system. More specifically, these efforts will need to address physiological needs related to individuals' life goals and priorities. So it has nothing to do with your material conditions. It has nothing to do with your material conditions in the collapsing system, but everything to do with your psychology. It's your mental illnesses that are the problem. It has nothing to do with the material conditions that the society are robbing you of and the system that's collapsing around you. How do we change people's attitude about how children will affect their lives if they privilege personal freedom over other ideals? Right? Now you see how they're making leaps, right? As long as you ignore that the reason why we want personal freedom is because we don't also want to take care of a child amidst a systemic collapse, right? A good place to start is to focus on one of the most fundamental psychological needs, the need for existential meaning. You see what the fascists are doing. Like this is straight up Jordan Peterson right here. This is fascism 101, right? That we don't generate our own meaning, right? That if our meaning isn't subserviating ourselves to the collapsing system, then we have no meaning. That's the definition. We're listless. We don't know how to generate meaning for ourselves. We're certainly not attempting to find meaning within the system that is collapsing around us, right? There's certainly the reason why we're feeling listless is that we're realizing that putting any meaning into a collapsing system or focusing any energy into a collapsing system is meaningless. And so we're attempting to rebuild new systems, but we don't know how because we have these people who are insisting that it's an individualist problem instead of a systemic issue, right? And so this is straight up fascism 101. This is the ground floor of fascism, right? That you need to find existential meaning amongst a dying system and kill others who oppose you. Humans are highly motivated to perceive their lives as meaningful. Yes, we do it naturally, right? And we are finding meaning outside of your collapsing system, which you insist is bad. And it is when they perceive their lives as full of meaning that they are the most mentally healthy, resilient, goal-driven, self-disciplined, and self-reliant. Yeah, it makes sense that the society is full of desperate people and people who are full of depression and anxiety because the system that we've been focusing all of our energy and meaning into is collapsing, right? Something that these people are working really, really hard to pretend doesn't exist. In this way, meaning can be thought of as a key ingredient to achieving personal independence. Yeah, we know. The Americans concerned about how having children may affect their personal independence may not realize that meaning is so empowering and that family is a fundamental source of meaning. Yeah, look, you see what they're doing? They're trying to convince us that, oh, a child will give you meaning, right? Failing to recognize that we know. We know. Like, we know that a child will give meaning, right? That's why we're not having children. because we don't want that meaning to be, well, look at the disaster that we're handing to these kids. We want the personal independence for ourselves to be able to avoid and maneuver most effectively within a collapsing system without having to need to also take responsibility for a life that can't take responsibility for itself, right? And so not having a kid amidst a systemic collapse is the most responsible thing that we can do. And us having a kid in order to have meaning for ourselves is just selfish babyishness, right? It's fascist. You're essentially giving birth to a child into hell. Like, why would you do that? Like, if you live in hell and you're having children, like, are you doing that kid a favor? Are you doing that kid a favor? No, you're not doing that kid a favor at all, right? And at the end of the day, this is just finger wagging. This is just finger wagging, is what it is. Well, it's your fault. It's your fault. Ignore the systemic collapse. Ignore the systemic collapse. This is all your fault. In addition, studies find that parents report higher levels of meaning than adults without children and have a greater sense of meaning when they are taking care. Like, how many cups of meaning, right? Like, I love how they talk about this as if there's like an actual measurement that can be done, right? These fucking fascists are doing everything they can to basically just finger wave at you. Be like, your life would be better. Cultural narratives that treat parenting as a threat to personal independence and a roadblock to fulfilling life may contribute to declining birth rates more than many realize. How about the systemic collapse, right? Look how hard they're trying to turn this into a cultural issue. It's your fault, right? Well, what about the literal systemic collapse? How come we're not ever supposed to have a conversation about the systemic collapse and the robbery of the nation, right? And I guess these things don't correlate. Here we go, and of course, and then they just give the game away, right? There are, of course, environmental, economic, and other challenges that can make people worried about bringing another human into this world, and that can make raising children difficult. But this is not new. You see how they just, like, admit it, and then they just hand wave it away, right? Oh no, it's certainly not the collapsing society, right? It's currently, it has nothing to do with the collapsing systems. For much of our history, most humans lived far more perilous lives than we live today. Again, just like, it was tough back then too, you know. Our challenge is less about our material conditions and more about our mindset. So ignore the collapsing society, you're the problem. This is Fascism 101. If we want a world with more children, we're going to have to convince people that having and raising kids is a critical ingredient of, not a barrier to, the good life. This is like detached fascism, is what I just read, right? Like, literally ignore the collapsing system. Ignore the collapsing society. 100% you're the problem. So they're working really hard to try to get us to ignore the Mystic PragerU just went pro incest. Okay, bud. I now am set up so that I can actually watch videos. We are definitely PragerU. What video, dude? What's the name of the video? You got to tell me. It's disgusting that there's this many people who are subscribed to these things. What video, bud? We're gonna watch it. We're gonna do it. Good evening, Major. Ronald Reagan made capitalism worse. No, he didn't. Ronald Reagan just kicked off Ronald Reagan was just the figure that was in power when the capitalists finally kicked off the capitalist experiment again, right? The capitalism was on a trajectory to becoming irrelevant, right? Because workers were beginning to make more gains for themselves. Unions were powerful. There was starting to be more strength in the society against the capitalists, and capitalists were really struggling to exploit workers for their own profit to remain parasites in the society, and they were really close to just being overwhelmed and chased out, right? And so Ronald Reagan doesn't, quote unquote, make capitalism works. Ronald Reagan starts capitalism back up again, right? And and it's not so much Reaganomics as it is just neoliberal. Like, the neoliberal period has been a disaster across the board. Yeah, I would never bring a child into this dark dystopian world, to be honest. Yeah, we're not doing them a favor, right? We're not doing them a favor. Good to see you, Lou. They've made it like other things in the world so that having a children is a privilege reserved only for the rich. Yeah, that's right, Matthias. But I mean, I think it's even worse than that, right? Like, because it, like, I don't think that bringing a kid into this reality is a good idea. Like, I really don't. Like, this place isn't nice. It's not a good place. Right, the people who are having kids, like, fine, like, more power to you. You're not doing your kids any favors, right? They are going to inherit a worse world, like, that's just written in the stars at this point. Especially when you've got, like, White House is pushing ahead research to cool Earth by reflecting back sunlight. So they've gone mad. They're finally actually doing it, right? Where they're literally, like, the White House is coordinating a 5-year research plan to study ways of modifying the amount of sunlight that reaches the Earth to temper the effects of global warming, a process sometimes called solar geoengineering or sunlight reflection. Right? This is psychotic. This is just madness. Like, plants need sunlight, right? The idea that you're going to just reflect sunlight and that'll get it. Like, we're literally going to do, like, super villain-esque style mass projects that have destructive capability behind them instead of just turn your engine off, right? Like, that's where we're getting to. Like, the society has been taken over by supervillains. There are no superheroes. And we're getting our finger waved at for not wanting to bring children into a world that is going to ignite. Like, it's time for us to accept, just accept, not with anger or rage or hyperbolically, that the people who rule this place are evil. They're not interested in the survival of the species. They're not interested in helping us maintain a stable environment or a stable society, right? They have gone psychotic, and they will destroy the species. And they'll finger wave at us the entire time it's happening, right? They already are. They already are finger waving at us. Oh, you're the issue. You're the problem. It has nothing to do with the systemic collapse of the society. You don't want to you want to maintain your personal independence because you're selfish. That's essentially what they're saying. You want to maintain your personal independence because you're selfish. Right? You don't want to have a kid. Don't you get that a kid will give you more meaning? Like, maybe. You know what? But why? The act of raising a child itself may have meaning associated with it, but we know that we're just not doing them a favor. That it's better this way. That if you're going to destroy the planet and the species and the society and collapse everything around us and ensure that we can't even pay wages or pay rent or any of that kind of stuff, we're not going to give birth to kids. It's not going to happen. You know? I'd rather have a kitten or a puppy. I realized I was always a comrade, was distracted by the culture war BS. John, you woke me up. Thank you again. Oh, thank you, Mystic. I appreciate that, bud. Well, and the culture war is interesting. Like, I think it's important. It's important that we remind ourselves of this. Okay, it's important to forgive ourselves for these things because, and to repent, right, and to just accept it that there's an enormous mechanism. There's an enormous mechanism that is constantly shitting out new perspectives and new information and new things about the culture war. And it's fascinating. Like, it is interesting. Like, I think that's something that we have to acknowledge. Like, it is interesting in the same way that, like, WWE wrestling is interesting, in the same way that sports are interesting, right? But is it as meaningful as the fact that you're owned and that you have an owner? No. The fact that you have an owner and that you are owned matters the most, for sure. And they'll do everything they can to make sure they never focus on that. Yeah, Tinker. I wish I was never born. I feel like every single one of us at some point thinks that. Right? Like, there's a little part of me. Oh, hey. I know. You don't like it when I do this, but I like it when I do this, so it's fine. Say hello. Say hello. Okay. You're especially barky today, dude. My little guy, he's like being extra barky today. My brain's still rewiring from conservative BS. I had to go back in time and slap my Ben Shapiro face self. Yeah, that's good, dude. That's good. The planet is exhausting. I wish I was born in another planet. It can't be worse than Earth. I mean, what you guys are articulating, right? What you're articulating is a sense of hopelessness, is a sense of that we get into the imaginative space, we get into the meta space of our imagination, and we can't imagine a world without capitalism, and we can't get past the dystopian nightmares that are ahead of us, right? But I think it's important for us to remain hopeful that the system that generated us is far more powerful than the systems that we've erected. That the systems of man are nothing in the face of the systems of the universe, right? That nothing, absolutely nothing. And maybe we, you and I, are going to witness some fairly spectacular collapses and live through some fairly spectacular systemic damage. But it's pretty unlikely that the Earth itself will be overwhelmed by us. It's pretty unlikely that that's the case. That maybe the hope for humanity is going to be gone, but not the hope for life, and certainly not the hope for Earth itself, right? Trickle down does not work, yeah. 3 million suckers subscribe to PragerU. Yeah, pretty brutal. All right. Dude, a pro-incest position coming out of PragerU. Are you kidding me? What is this? Go away. I don't care about this. Dennis Prager incest. Is this the one? Hold on. Hamas is a greater obstacle to peace than Israel. Pretty much a joke. All right. You know what? I'm gonna say it. I'm not gonna watch any video if it doesn't get put in the Discord. That's what it's gonna be. If you're not putting the video in the Discord that you want me to watch, I'm not gonna search it up. No. Too bad. Okay. I had it right there. Dennis Prager I just don't really want to listen to.
Conservative Dennis Prager is saying bizarre things again.
All right.
Like, you know,
I don't
care
about this guy's perspective. But okay, here we go.
Take a look.
Either the Bible's right or the left is right.
Either the Bible's right or the left is right. As if this guy's ever read the Bible. That's my favorite part about these frauds, is that they keep insisting that they have expertise in these subjects and that they're the experts of things like the Bible. They've never read these things, right? They've never read these things. Well,
they can't both be right. That's why you can't be a serious Jew or Christian and be a leftist.
No, you can't be a serious fascist and be a leftist, right? Like, if you actually read the Bible, which Dennis Prager has never read the Bible in his life. He's never cracked it open. He's never taken a look at it. Christ was a communist. Like, Christ was a fucking communist. There's, like, no two ways about it, right? Sell your money, give it to the poor. He was constantly saying this, right? No no, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Like, this is what Christ was saying. And a guy like Dennis Prager, who is illiterate, probably doesn't read books, right? Like, I'm surprised that he can find put his shoes on in the morning. He's never read the Bible. He has no idea who Christ is, right? And here he is saying, like, yeah, you can't be a good Christian and a leftist. Christ was a leftist. Like, it's pretty embarrassing. Like, this guy is, like, overtly embarrassing. And the fact that there's, like, 3 million subscribers to PragerU just tells you why America's in a full-scale decline, right?
You can be a liberal, you can be a conservative, but you can't be a leftist. Anyway, none of you have a secular argument against it, and I don't blame you for that, because there isn't any. There's no secular argument against adult incest.
This man is a child. Like, this man is such a fucking child. Like, obviously there's a secular argument. The secular argument goes like this, right? Hold on. Sorry, I was thinking about pedophilia, right? I was going to talk about consent. Oh my god. I'm so, like, these people are so fucking depraved. There's no secular argument against incest. This guy wants to have sex with his sister, right? Like, that's really what... Yeah, I mean, the secular argument against incest would be something like, yeah, if you're going to try to propagate the species, it's probably a bad idea to get incestuous about it, right? That we see what happens to incestuous groups, right? Like, we see what happens. That they become mad and crazy, right? That the children that you're spawning in from an incest-based relationship, you're not doing those kids any favors, right? That diversity is what you want, right? You want diversity within the gene pool. That's clearly the yeah. I love that. You're right, Grinning, right? I'd sleep with my siblings if the Bible didn't prevent me. Every time I hug my sister, I gotta put a Bible between them. Yeah, isn't it fascinating the type of people who worship Christ the most are the same type of people Christ despises? Like, and they're not even trying to hide their contempt. Like, they're not even trying to hide their contempt, right?
Brother and sister want to make love? What's your argument? That they're going to produce mentally retarded offspring? It's nonsense.
No, it isn't. Like, it isn't.
Takes many generations of inbreeding to do that.
But
there is no secular argument against adult consensual incest. There's a religious argument. Sex cannot enter family life. It's a big taboo.
I mean, I love that that's considered a religious argument. That, like, that as if, like, I love that these Republicans, they're constantly talking about the nuclear family. They're constantly talking about the importance of maintaining the family. They're constantly talking about how the family unit must be strong and stable, but they don't care about the family unit at all, right? That familial politics is one of the strongest form of politics, right? And if you want to absolutely destroy a family, right, then have them start having sex with one another. Like, have them start having sex with one another. Like, you want a good argument for why a secular argument for why incest is wrong? It's the same reason why having sex with your coworkers is a bad idea, right? It will destroy the work environment. Like, you will be confronted with a level of politics internally that will lead to the destruction of the family unit. Like, this sort of baby-brained idea that Prager has. Oh my God, what? I cannot believe I'm listening to this fucking guy.
See, people think that we could live without the greatest source of wisdom and morality in the history of the world.
I mean, you do, Dennis. Like, you don't read this thing. Like, let's be honest, man. Dennis Prager's not reading this book. Like, these guys are frauds. It's why I constantly say we should read the Bible. We've got to read the Bible, right? As leftists, we have to claim this book and read it, because frauds like this are claiming that they have
Bible. That's what they think. Even some secular conservatives think that. They don't realize they're living on the fumes of the Judeo-Christian value system.
Okay. There's your daily dose of fucking Dennis Prager. Like, just an overwhelming creep. It's very, very weird and disappointing to me that Dennis Prager has, like, any kind of following whatsoever. It's just, like, weird. Like, what a weirdo. What a total fucking weirdo. Okay, moving on. Let's get past this guy. What a fucking loser this guy is. This story is the story, eh? Like, White House is pushing ahead research to cool Earth by reflecting back sunlight. Right? Yeah, Prager should be in Jeffrey Epstein Island. I mean, he probably was, dude. Like, dude wants to have sex with his sister. Let's just do a quick take a look at some graphs here. Monthly U.S. homicides, 1999 to 2020. Big spike there. We all know what that is, right? What happened in late 2001? Something must have happened. But for the most part, monthly U.S. homicides, kind of stable, right? What's happening here? What's happening here? What happens in 2020? Oh my God. Police killings in developed countries. United States. The next closest one, Canada. Where was I on 9/11? I was in my first year of university. That 9/11 happened when I remember it. I was on campus, living in dorm, and I remember everybody gathering in the common room, and we all were watching the TV. Yeah, like, people who were born, like, on 9/11 or, like, near or around 9/11 have almost no understanding whatsoever of how much we lost as a country because of 9/11. That the civil liberties and the economic freedom that existed pre 9/11, like Homeland Security Act and the subsequent fallout from all of that, the neoliberal era, like, we used to be able to, as a people, like, someone like myself, right? I would be able to go get any minimum wage job, right? Any minimum wage job, like literally selling shoes, right? Doing something mundane, and I would be able to have a house, a wife, kids, and a vehicle, right? Like, yeah, maybe money would be tight, right? Sure. But that was not unheard of, and it wasn't considered unusual. Like, they were doing sitcoms where people were living the American dream this way, where this was considered normal, right? The Simpsons are like a classic example. Married with Children, like this classic example of people who and you can see like the Cosbys, Full House, right? The examples are all over the place where you have like television shows where people were obviously like living the American dream, as it was called, right? Just like a single wage earner having this household. And that's all gone, right? That's all gone. That the people who and what it's generated, like what it's generated is it's generated this class of people within the society who are delusional. They because they literally had that life handed to them, they consider that what's occurred because they worked hard, right? And it's great to listen to like housewives who've never worked a job in their life, right? Because they never had to, because their single wage earning husband was able to make all the money for her, right? Say these kinds of dim-witted things, when the reality is that everyone is working right now. There's no such thing as like a single wage earner and a housewife, right? Like that dynamic has fallen to the wayside. Everyone's working, everyone's exhausted, and kids today, like your Gen Z type today, they don't actually understand that was the case. I grew up in a household like that, right? My mom didn't work. I had a brother and a sister, right? My dad was a single, he brought home the bacon, that kind of thing, right? Like, this life was normal and possible and regular. It wasn't considered odd or unusual. And yet, here we find ourselves. Here we find ourselves. Ontario Party fundraising results. NDP challenging the PC money machine. Liberals are dead. This I think is important to point out. This is Ontario news, of course, but this is important to point out just because it shows you, like, the NDP and the Liberals are constantly vying for leftist status or liberal status, right? Who's the left party? Who's the party that's got the support and the broad base of support within the public? Well, there's your answer. Looks like the populace has jumped towards the NDP, and that the Liberals are basically going to be like a fourth tier party now. So in the upcoming election that's going to happen in Ontario in 3 years, it's the NDP who we'll be looking at. Well, it'll be interesting to see who they elect as their leader, and we'll see if they can actually formulate a campaign strategy that will actually galvanize people to the polls. I doubt it, because we're already seeing more NDP members decry party's McCarthy-esque vetting tactics, right? It felt like a loyalty or purity test. So the NDP, and we're also seeing stories like this one coming out of British Columbia, where, where is she? Where, yeah, Canada's left-wing hope is being sabotaged by her own party, right? This is Anjali Appuduari, Democratic Socialist leadership candidate for British Columbia's New Democratic Party, is rattling the party establishment. Her bold left-wing politics have provoked what appears to be a smear campaign by operators within the party itself. So the NDP is doing everything it can to remain a milquetoast neoliberal party. That all of the socialist ideals that the party once stood for are gone. It stands for nothing except ensuring that the neoliberal agenda continues moving forward. That its strategy for doing that is to throw a couple of breadcrumbs here and there, right? But that's essentially its strategy, is to just appear slightly more palatable than the Conservatives, so that people will vote for them and get their like 1% increase to EI or whatever, right? I don't blame Jugmeat for the decline. I think the decline was happening well before Jugmeat. It was already happening underneath Layton. That Layton himself wasn't really much of a socialist, right? better in terms of his rhetoric for sure. And then Mulcair, like Mulcair is not a socialist. Like he's not interested in that. Right? He literally describes himself as a fiscal conservative. Like that's. I mean, the NDP was a legit leftist party under Tommy Douglas. Like, it'd be difficult to find, like, I think that's a difficult. You would be hard pressed to make the claim that Tommy Douglas was not a socialist, like at least a democratic socialist. Like, he's and easily the furthest left party that that has really struck for serious power. The more I study social democratic parties, the more I realize that after the establishment of neoliberalism, all of them have abandoned their socialist roots. Yeah. And I mean, and that's really just as simple as like why if you had $100 billion, right? If you had $1 billion, forget about $100 billion. If you had $1 billion, the first thing you would do is buy out your competitors, your political competitors. It's literally the first thing anybody would do. And to pretend like they wouldn't, I think requires kind of a diluted mindset. That, like, when I was growing up, there was this idea that, like, yeah, giving all that money to the one guy and it'll trickle down, that's great, that'll work out. Like, even as a kid, I was like, wouldn't they just, like, literally buy the political system? Like, it's the first thing that anybody would do. And it's irrational to think that anything else would happen. Like, you would do it, I would do it, everybody would do it. If you have $1 billion, the first thing that you would do is ensure that the political system is structured in such a way so that it can never strip you of that money, right? That's the first thing that you would do. And that's exactly what we've seen. I mean, Jagmeet is just more of an extension of it, if you ask me. Like, he's more explicit, I think, is probably the best way to say it. That, like, someone like Mulcair still was sort of planted in the grassroots side of things, right? Still a party establishment kind of thing. But, like, Jagmeet's not really hiding it. Like, there are very clear and obvious things that the NDP could be doing to differentiate themselves from the other parties. Yeah, and Mulcair now works for the right wing media as a commentator. Exactly, right? Exactly. And because they need voices to create a counter narrative, right? To find explanations for what's going on outside of what is actually real, right? That we are experiencing systemic collapse. And they have to find voices to create a counter narrative to the reality of what it means to live in a society that's experiencing systemic collapse. That the systems are no longer capable of responding rationally to the crises, and in fact are responsible for generating those crises. And the reason why they can't respond to those crises is because the crises are being generated by the very people who have the money. And if we wanted to prevent those crises from happening, the first thing we would do is strip away the wealth of the people creating the crises, right? But we can't respond rationally. The system's no longer capable of responding rationally, and so that's putting it into collapse. And people are no longer willing to put any energy into the system, right? We're preparing for systemic collapse. Right. That's why people want their independence. That's why people don't want to have kids. Right. Just what we were saying at the beginning of all of this. We don't want to do these sorts of things because we want to be agile and ready to move when the systemic collapse affect us. Canada has yet to see a true leftist communist party anywhere. That's not actually true. Throughout Canada's history, there have been communists elected into parliament. It does happen, right? They've never been able to gain enough strength to be able to even be like the opposition or even like a minority party like the Greens, because every single time they start to gain that power, people just go missing, you know, like that kind of shit starts happening. Like there was a period of time where like Tim Buck, one of the great communists of Canada, was literally just arrested along with some of his compatriots, thrown in prison, straight up. So like, if you're sitting there scratching your head going like, oh, why hasn't there been a communist kind of thing? It's because we murder communists and arrest them. Like that's how we roll. Yep, I've lived under cons, libs, NDP, independents. They're all the same, from the rich upper class, and they're all equally terrible. Yeah, because they cannot be, right? Because if the solution is strip the wealth from the wealthy, create a more egalitarian society, well, the wealthy will never vote their own wealth away. Like that, they'll never work to achieve that. It's not what they're about, right? And that's a systemic issue. And so, yeah, we're slowly moving into a fascist state of society. I don't think it's slowly, like really, and I also don't think we're moving. Like I think we're there. I think we're there. It's just our awareness of it is what's shifting. It's not that we're not already there. It's that we're not. We're just not being aware of it. Like the Homeland Act, right, in the United States is a fascist document. There's just no defense for it. It literally removes constitutional rights, right? And the Supreme Court, like the Supreme Court is it might as well just be like a fascist council. They're literally there to destroy the society. That's like their stated agenda at this point. Doug Ford sold his house because he cannot stand leftist protests on his property. We found his new house. Yeah, we found his new house. We know where it is. I'm going to try to convince people to actually do a protest at his house. Because we know, we found it. Like, it wasn't hard. Apparently it's right beside his mom's, which is very sweet. Right? What a sweet old boy. He moved to be closer to his mom. That's nice. So we're going to go cause him problems. So let's move into, I know it's the stuff that you guys all love. What we're looking at here is the territorial integrity of Ukraine, defending the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. We touched on this very briefly yesterday, but I've got a whole bunch of links here talking about the Ukraine war, right? What you're seeing here is a vote of condemnation of Russia's annexation of sections of Ukraine, right? The blue are in favor of the condemning Russia. The red, of course, are against. You can see it's mainly Russia, Nicaragua over here, right? Like one like Azerbaijan or something like this. And then the yellow is abstention. Just, we're not going to get involved in this. We're not drawing lines in the sand on this. This is an issue between the European powers, right? Oh yeah, Syria, right over there, doink. So you can see what is surprising to me on this map, and I'll absolutely admit it, is how much of South America was in favor of this resolution. That's pretty surprising to me. Like, I would expect, like, Venezuela has no answer, right? Like, Iran, no answer, right? Which is just as good as an abstention. Like, that's sort of what I would expect more throughout South America. To see that is a bit surprising to me. And I don't know quite what to make of it, honestly. And we've got a good video. These guys, what I'm really hoping is that these guys do like a compilation video, that they take like all of their videos and create like one big long compilation, because they've been doing great work in terms of their analysis of what's been going on during this conflict. This video called "Russia Gains Back the Upper Hand in Ukraine."
On October 12th, air alerts sounded in different regions of Ukraine for the third day in a row. The eastern and central regions of the country were mostly affected, including the capital city of Kiev. While Russian forces do not stop damaging the strategic military and energy infrastructure throughout Ukraine, Kiev is assessing the damage. According to the Ukrainian Minister of Energy, the 2 days of massive strikes resulted in damage to about 30% of the country's energy infrastructure. Among the targets hit by Russian missiles, there are also strategically important military facilities. For example, the railway junctions were damaged in Pavlograd, which is the main line of supplies for the Ukrainian grouping in the Donbass. Amid the ongoing missile and UAV attacks, the Russian military gained the upper hand on some front lines. On the night of October 11, Ukrainian forces attempted again to storm Russian positions near Kremenaya. The offensive of the Ukrainian military was repelled and even led to a Russian counteroffensive. Russian units managed to advance towards the river of Zerobets and take control of the villages of Terny and Novosadovoye. Despite the Ukrainian efforts to break through Russian defenses near Savatovo and Kremenaya, Russians are still holding control of the towns as well as of the road between them. In the DPR, Russian-led forces continue the mop-up operations on the outskirts of Bakhmut and advance deep into the town. Wagner assault groups are also approaching Bakhmut from the southern direction. The Russian offensive is also ongoing on the western outskirts of the city of Donetsk. The recent damage to the railway junctions is expected to complicate Ukrainian military supplies and may threaten Ukrainian defenses on the Donbass front lines. In the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions, Ukrainian units continue their attacks on Russian positions with small forces in different areas, but so far to no avail. On October 12, Kiev confirmed the receiving of 4 additional HIMARS combat vehicles, allocation of which was announced by the U.S. on October 4th. Also, the arrival of 4 German Iris-T air defense systems to Ukraine was confirmed. Western partners continue to provide weapons to the Ukrainian terrorist regime. Despite the warnings from Moscow, Kiev did not stop attempts to carry out terrorist attacks on the Russian territory. The Russian security forces thwarted a terrorist attack prepared by a Ukrainian citizen on the outskirts of Moscow. The terrorist was captured with a portable Igla manpad. Another Ukrainian terrorist was captured when preparing an explosion in the Russian Bryansk region. On the same day, Russian security service identified 12 accomplices of a terrorist attack on the Crimean Bridge. 8 of them were detained, including citizens of Ukraine and Armenia. The orchestrator of the attack, which claimed lives of 4 Russian civilians, was the head of military intelligence of Ukraine.
That's a good way of putting it, Adam. Countries that represent over 50% of the world's population did not support the resolution or abstained condemning Russia's invasion. Yeah, when you take a look at the map, like, it does look like, oh, there's overwhelming support, but really, like, most of the world's population, like, huge swath of the world's population is right in here, right? Yeah, my criticism about the missile launches, there's a bunch of non-military targets. Yeah, we're hit, like, parking lots, apartment buildings, parks. Yeah, like, there's no way to avoid that. Like, there's no way to avoid that. Like you can, like, if you listen to military people and if you listen to arms dealers, they're gonna say things like, this is precision grade, we can hit within it. But like, the truth is that they don't, right? That they have a target, and then there's reality. Right? And we don't actually have the level of precision that we think we have with these sorts of things. And it's the reason why Russia never really wanted to do this, and why they never want to act this way, because there is just no way to prevent indiscriminate destruction. There's just no way to prevent indiscriminate destruction. It's an inevitability. It will happen. And what we're seeing is Russia escalate because it feels it has no other alternative, right? And again, like, one of the interesting questions that I think gets asked during this period of time is what happens if we win? Right? What happens if we win? Like, if we win, right? If we win, well, you're going to push Russia into the corner and they're going to launch nukes. Right? Like, this is the stupidest idea that I think we could possibly have. That winning this war, right? Winning this war it will be a disaster for us and for the species. Right? Wounded animal. World must be ready for nuclear war with Russia if Putin's army collapses, warns ex-NATO chief Richard Sheriff. So this is our best case scenario. This is us winning. We win the war, we destroy the Russians, we push them back into their territory, and they nuke us. Like, this is what winning looks like. It's absolutely foolishness. It's absolute foolishness what we're doing. No, I mean, do you source that? You don't need to source that. Like, they can say as much as they like that we're going to shoot that at Section 4A, Article B12. Like, they can say it all they want. But, like, there's no... It's not physics. There's my source. Physics. Like, it's not possible. There's no such thing as a 100% perfect precision weapon. It doesn't exist, right? You can get fucking close, right? You can get near to it, but like the basic line of technology, all of history, right? Like, there's just no such thing as a perfect precision weapon. It simply does not exist. Much of the collateral damage happened due to Ukrainian anti-air systems misfiring and malfunctioning. There's a bit of that too, of course. Like, war isn't clean. War isn't clean, right? This is why it's always fucking shitty. Like, it's always fucking shitty. There's literally no such thing as and it flows right in with this precision weapons idea, right? It just doesn't exist that way. That you know, hitting your target, like, you can get close to hitting your... It's the reason why they want big fucking explosions. Because if you can get close enough, then you'll destroy it, right? But, like, there's just no... And the human error aspect of it, the human involvement aspect of it, the simple... like, the simple reality that technology itself can be fussy, right? The reason why we have IT departments, the reason why we have these sorts of things, like, technology itself isn't always reliable and doesn't always work the way that you think it's going to work, right? And you know that if you've ever worked with any piece of technology for any length of time, like your own computer, like, sometimes you literally just need to turn the thing off. Well, okay, you're in the middle of a battlefield, you're in the middle of a war scenario, you're getting shot at, oh, let's just reset the tank. Like, the situation is rife with the potential for errors, miscalculations, misfirings, and malfunctions. It's rife for it. It's just that instead of the stakes being like, oh, we just gotta wait a moment so that you can, you know, beep your card again or whatever, right? The stakes are human lives. People die, right? Yeah, most of the world population lives in countries that abstained or voted against the resolution. Yeah, pretending like the votes of a dozen tiny European or Pacific micro-states carry more weight than the vote of India or China is absurd. Yeah, it's a form of global gerrymandering. Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, for sure. Like, it is interesting how most of the systems that we put in place are designed to go against what the population desires, right? Has a United States president won the popular vote in the last 20 years? Has that even happened? The U.S. exerts immense pressure on small nations to vote the way they are told to in the UN, yeah. Well, and ultimately this vote doesn't really amount to much, right? It's an interesting vote, because it does sort of show where chips lie and where people are, all that. But China's not going to give those regions back. Like, that's not going to happen. Like, they spent a lot of resources and a lot of human capital, right? They've spent a lot of resources, and a lot of human capital to get this territory. They're not going to just give it back, right? Like, this territory unless NATO and unless the United States and unless Ukraine is able to build a formidable enough military force to be able to push into this region and seize it back, they're never getting it back. It's not going to happen. That Russia isn't just going to shrug and be like, okay, I guess war over, here you go. Like, that's not going to happen. The Russians, like, if the Ukrainians wanted to prevent that from happening, then they should have negotiated a peace and stuck to that negotiated peace from the outset. That would have been the way to do it, right? That abide by the Minsk agreements, pull your troops away from the DPR, right? Get people, stop shelling those citizens, right? Negotiate a ceasefire, negotiate a de-escalation. It's not what the Ukrainians did. It's not what the Ukrainians did. That a peace was a ceasefire and a peace was negotiated at the beginning of all of this, when the troops were there shelling the Donbass in the first place, right? They just didn't abide by it and they didn't care. Zelensky went and told them to pull back, and the Nazis said "fuck you." Very, very straightforward, right? And so now this has forced the Russians' hands. Here they are in the territory. Thousands of Russian citizens have died, right? Thousands of people have died to get this piece of land. Millions, if not billions of dollars have been spent in order to get this land. They're not going to give it back. It's just not going to happen, right? That whether or not the UN acknowledges it, or whether or not the global society or whatever you want to call it acknowledges it, this land is Russian. Like, this, it's just, I just think it's sort of madness to think that any other narrative is actually going to exist. Like, it's just kind of self-deluded. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Precision weaponry is a relative term. Obviously, nothing is perfect, but I'd say that when a salvo of over 100 missiles kills only 17 civilians, according to Ukraine, that is pretty precise. Yeah, no, I'm not trying to say that they haven't improved on it and that it's not bad, but like, there is going to be indiscriminate damage. Like, there's going to be indiscriminate collateral damage. It's just going to happen. Right? You're not going to launch these types of weapons and walk away perfectly clean. It just does. Like, this isn't a fucking Marvel movie, right? Like, it's life doesn't work that way. It's about the average for a U.S. drone strike at a wedding. I mean, we know because of Daniel Hale that drones missed their target between 80 to 90% of the time, right? Daniel Hale's testimony that he's still spending 4 years in prison for testifying and whistleblowing that the drone program is a complete and total failure, right? Because of exactly this. It's not precise. They don't hit their targets, right? I remember there's also another map out there which shows which country sends military aid, which send humanitarian aid. That'd be an interesting one to see. Yeah, it's only Western countries and their satellites sending weapons to Ukraine, of course. No, of course. So this is from Caitlin Johnstone, doing the good work, fighting the good fight. U.S. rejection of Moscow's offer for peace talks is utterly inexcusable. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Tuesday that Moscow was open to talks with the U.S. or with Turkey on ending the war in Ukraine, claiming that U.S. officials are lying when they say Russia has been refusing peace talks. Reuters reports. Lavrov said officials, including White House National Security spokesman John Kirby, has said the United States was open to talks, but that Russia has refused. This is a lie, Lavrov said. We have not received any serious offers to make contact. Lavrov's claim was given more weight when the U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price dismissed the offer for peace talks shortly after it was extended, citing Russia's recent military missile strikes on Kiev. We see this as posturing, Price said at Tuesday's press briefing. We do not see this as constructive, legitimate offer to engage in the dialogue and diplomacy that is absolutely necessary to see an end to this brutal war of aggression against the people and the state, the government of Ukraine. This is inexcusable. At a time when our world is at its most perilous moment since the Cuban Missile Crisis, according to many experts, as well as the President of the United States, the U.S. government has no business making the decision not to sit down with Russian officials and work towards de-escalation and peace. They have no business making that call on behalf of every terrestrial organism on this planet whose life is being risked in the name of these games of nuclear brinkmanship. The fact that this war has been escalated with missile strikes on the Ukrainian capital makes peace talks more necessary, not less. This rejection is made all the more outrageous by new information from the Washington Post that the U.S. government does not believe Ukraine can win this war and refuses to encourage it to negotiate with Moscow. Privately, U.S. officials say neither Russia nor Ukraine is capable of winning the war outright, but they have ruled out the idea of pushing or even nudging Ukraine to the negotiating table, WAPO reports. They say they do not know what the end of the war looks like, or how it might end, or when, insisting that that's up to Kiev. These 2 points taken together lend even more credibility to an argument I've been making from the very beginning of this war, that the U.S. does not want peace in Ukraine, but rather seeks to create a costly military quagmire for Moscow, just as U.S. officials have confessed to trying to do in Afghanistan and in Syria, which would explain why U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said the U.S. goal in Ukraine is actually to weaken Russia, and also why the empire appears to have actively torpedoed a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia in the early days of the conflict. This proxy war has no exit strategy, and that is entirely by design. Many have been calling for the U.S. to abandon its policy of actively sustaining this war while avoiding peace talks. President Biden's language, we're about at the top of the language scale, if you will. Former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Mike Mullen told ABC's This Week on Sunday regarding the president's recent remark that this conflict could lead to Armageddon. I think we need to back off that a little bit and do everything we possibly can to try and get to the table to resolve this thing, Mullen said, adding, as is typical in any war, it has got to end, and usually there are negotiations associated with that. The sooner, the better, as far as I'm concerned. One thing that the United States can do is drop the position, the official position, that the war must go on to weaken Russia severely, meaning no negotiations, Noam Chomsky argued in a recent appearance on Democracy Now! Would that open the way to negotiations? Diplomacy? Can't be sure. There's only one way to find out. That's to try. If you don't try, of course it won't happen. It is time for the United States to supplement its military support for Ukraine with a diplomatic track to manage this crisis before it spirals out of control, said the Quincy Institute's George Bebe following the Monday missile strikes on Kiev, calling it a major escalation in the war that was bound to bring the world closer to a direct military collision between Russia and the United States. The Americans have come to an agreement with the Russians, and then the war will be over, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban said at an event on Tuesday, adding that anyone who thinks that this war will be concluded through Russian-Ukrainian negotiations is not living in this world. It is absolutely insane that the world's two nuclear superpowers are escalating and accelerating towards direct military confrontation, and they aren't even talking to each other. And it's even crazier that anyone who says they should get called a Kremlin agent and a Chamberlain-like appeaser. Responsible Statescraft's Harry Kazensis discusses the freakish dynamic in a recent article titled, "Talking is not appeasement, it's avoiding nuclear Armageddon." I have fought more than 30 combat simulations and war games under my own direction for a private defense contract over the last several months, looking at various aspects of the Russia-Ukraine war, and one thing is clear. The chances of a nuclear war increase significantly every day that passes, In every scenario I tested, the Biden administration slowly gives Ukraine ever more advanced weapons, like ATACMS, F-16s, and other platforms that Russia has consistently warned pose a direct military threat. While each scenario has postulated a different point at which Moscow decides to use a tactical nuclear weapon in order to counter conventional platforms it can't easily defeat, the chances that Russia uses nukes grow as new and more powerful military capabilities are introduced into the battlefield by the West. In fact, in 28 of the 30 scenarios I have run since the war began, some sort of nuclear exchange occurs. The good news is that there is a way out of the crisis, however imperfect it may be. In the two scenarios where nuclear war was averted, direct negotiations led to a ceasefire. I repeat again that it is absolutely pants-on head gibbering insanity that these direct negotiations are not already presently underway. Let us petition any and all higher powers we have faith in that this changes very soon. Let us also petition the leaders of our individual nations around the world to exert whatever kind of pressure they can muster upon Washington for these talks to commence. This brinksmanship threatens us all, and the managers of the U.S. empire have no business playing these games with our lives. Surround the halls of power. It's literally the only thing they'll care about. Like these people are psychotic. Like they've lost the thread of reality. Eric, you're saying I understand your argument. Just want an actual expert source that explains it. I don't have something at my fingertips, Eric. They refused negotiations in late spring. Back then, Russia just wanted Donbass. Now, Russia's former regions of Ukraine is non-negotiable. Yeah, if Ukraine again refuses, they'll lose even more. I mean, we're kind of in an in for a penny, in for a pound sort of situation. Like, Russia is going to put 200,000 troops at least onto the field. Like, they're not going to just do nothing with that, right? They're not just going to sit there and consolidate positions. Like, and the more energy that the Russians put into this, the more they're going to want, right? Like, and NATO and Ukraine have shown fairly ineffective at being able to push back against Russian positions. Like, there just comes a point where the Russians are going to have to say, like, okay, if you're not going to negotiate a peace, then we're going to have to enforce one, right? It's not what Biden wants. It's what the warmongers in Washington, and especially the industrial military complex, want. Yeah, and I mean, there is this aspect of it where it's just like, you know, more money for us. Like, oh, every weapon that we sell Ukraine and every weapon we tax from the Canadian and American people and send there is just more money for us, right? So why shouldn't we? The person who wrote that does not understand Russian nuclear doctrine. Russia doesn't have tactical nukes in its military doctrine. They do not recognize that concept. Nuclear war is all or nothing. I mean, by definition, that is true. Yeah, the concept of a tactical nuke I've always found to be a bit funny. This will just be tactically done. I'm sure the ecosystem and the Earth will be completely fine with us doing. A few acres of snow, good to see you, bud. And the thing that I think is so fucked up and funny about all this is that we're all still going to work. That's my favorite part. We're all just still going to work. You know? Oh yeah, nuclear Armageddon is upon us. We're ruled by utter psychopaths. Well, off to do my job. A voice of sanity in all of it, of course. France says it won't deploy nukes if Russia uses them against Ukraine. Right? So here you have the French basically saying straight out, no, if they use nukes in Ukraine, we're not going to participate. Yep. World's ending. Oops, still have to work 8 to 5, pay the bills. I find myself asking myself, like, would homelessness be that bad? How bad would it actually be? right? Canada announces another military aid package for Ukraine as Russia presses air attacks. The $500 million pool budgeted for Ukraine aid has been exhausted. What's the price of a basic income again? What was the cost of a basic income again? How much would that cost? By the end of this, we will have sent more money to Ukraine than we will have given to our own citizens. Like, by the end of this. Canada is also providing, as Ukraine struggles to fend off a series of punishing air attacks, Russian air attacks, Canada is sending the embattled Eastern European country more supplies. Everything from munitions to mittens, Defense Minister Anita Anand announced Wednesday. Just over 15.2 million in howitzer ammunition and 15 million in winter clothing make up the bulk. In the latest military assistance package, Anand announced as she sat down with her NATO counterparts in Brussels. The overall package is worth 47 million. Got to make sure we're on the wrong side of history here, guys. Got to make sure we're giving as much money to the Nazis as we possibly can. The Liberal government set aside 500 million in the spring budget for military aid to Ukraine. That pot of money has since been exhausted, mostly through the purchase of 39 brand new armored support vehicles, a handful of which are in the process of being delivered now. The meeting of NATO defense ministers in Brussels comes against the backdrop of Moscow's stepped-up air campaign in Russia. Russia has lobbed dozens of cruise missiles and Iranian-made drones at critical infrastructure across the country. Yeah, I think that's probably true. There's little fact that Russia has explicitly ruled out using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. It would be stupid to nuke their own doorstep. It's not Russia that constantly talks about nukes. Yeah, all this fear-mongering about Russian nuclear weapons is gaslighting. Yeah, I think you're right about that. That, like, when the Russians talk about nukes, it's responsive, right? That for them, they have stated very clearly what their red lines are. And they've stated very clearly what would need to happen for them to use nuclear bombs, right? And it's not that they're just going to suddenly look at a military target and be like, yeah, let's nuke it. Like, Russia has the capability to wipe out military targets without the use of nuclear ordnance, right? The part that baffles me is the conservative who wants to stop arming Ukraine. I mean, I think there's two things going on. I actually think there's three things going on with that, Eric, which is actually pretty interesting. Thing number one is just straight up contrarianism, right? Like the conservatives are not conservatives. They're just contrarians, right? They're just taking the counter position because it's the position that's not in the position of power. So if the people in power are saying we need to fund Ukraine, then these contrarians and these reactionaries will simply say we should stop arming Ukraine because it's the opposite position, and that's it. And then two, I think there is a business argument, right? There is a straight up like corporate business argument to be like, this is a bad idea. Like, we're going to lose money in the long run. That from a nuts and bolts perspective, right? Every dollar we spend on this war is a dollar that we're not spending somewhere else, right? And of course, then there is actually like the conservative Christian argument that like war is bad and we should not kill each other for senseless reasons, right? And I also think there is like a good amount that the people who are really bouncing off of local media and of network media, let's say, are right-wingers, right? The right wing are the people who have lost faith in the media apparatus more than anybody else and are more willing to listen to figures like, let's say, Jimmy Dore, right? Are more than willing to use independent media sources. And these sources are very much anti-war and are very much saying, hey, we need to stop doing this. It's the liberals who are actually pro-war in this circumstance, right? And I know why that's happening in Canada, because the Liberal government has an enormous Ukrainian wing. The deputy prime minister, for God's sakes, is Ukrainian. Like, there is this enormous Ukrainian contingency that exists within the Liberal Party that makes the Liberals, that puts the Liberals in an anti-Russia position from the outset. I stepped away for a while. Did you already talk about AOC getting heckled for supporting arming Ukraine? I mean, I'm glad that people are heckling her for that. Like, yeah, heckle everybody. Heckle all these guys. Like, you're literally talking to a guy that says we should be showing up at their houses and surrounding their houses. Like, oh no, she got heckled? Oh, okay. We should be surrounding her house. Like, we should be surrounding Joe Biden's house. We should be surrounding Joe Manchin's house. Like, they literally shouldn't be able to get out to and in their house without walking through a mob of people who are screaming at them and throwing shit at them. Like, this idea that I'm supposed to read a headline and be like, oh no, some people threw some gravel at the prime minister. I'm like, yeah, that should be every single day. He shouldn't be able to go anywhere without having shit thrown at him. Like, the idea that we're supposed to just like, oh, how rude, how rude of you to do that. You know what's rude? Destroying a society and throwing people into homelessness, fomenting a war, right? Those things seem rude, right? That seems rude. Like the idea that we're going to so I don't get like oh, okay, so AOC, a couple people heckled her for it. Okay, like to me that's like not even the bare minimum. Like that's like, okay, like she should be surrounded and hounded 100% of her life. Like she should need to be surrounded by CIA and FBI agents wherever she goes. Like that's where we need to be right now. And so the idea that we're like, boo, and that's making headlines and we're all supposed to care. Ugh. No, I hadn't covered it yet. There are only two scenarios Russian doctrine allows for use of nukes. NATO uses nukes, that's right. Or existential threat to the Russian state. Yeah, full-scale invasion. Yeah, attempted decapitation strike on Moscow. Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, okay. Tell you what. As always, I say it. Put the video in the Discord. Right? Put the video in the Discord. We'll play it up. This is an article. Find out which cities have the greatest housing bubble risk. Guess it's Toronto, guys. Like, it's Toronto. Boom. 2.24 according to this. You got Hong Kong, Tokyo, Tel Aviv. I don't know why they've like done it like this and they haven't put it on an actual map. Is the article section of your Discord for paid members? Yeah. If all you got to do is donate $1 to the Patreon. That's all it takes. Donate $1 to the Patreon, and it gets you into the Discord, right? As you can see, there's like a constant flow. There's an article section, right? All of this kind of stuff. I pull all kinds of stuff out of the Discord. And it allows a constant connection, right? Good opportunity to say like, share, subscribe, guys. Like, share, subscribe. All it takes is $1 donated to the Patreon, gets you into the Discord, and that means that if you're saying like, "Hey, John, do you want to watch a video?" And yes, Eric, I am. I've got a headset already set up and ready to go. I got the tech. I'm all set up so we can watch videos. So if you put videos of if you want me to watch some videos, put it in the Discord, right? And Ligadzi, you're calling for it. Let's do it. David Lynch, David. And what it allows me to do now is that I can actually just play the David Lynch video without any problem, right? I'm doing
Here
10.
we go for today's number.
Oop.
It's October 13, 2022. 10 balls.
10 balls.
Each ball has a number.
Each ball has a number.
Numbers 1 through 10.
Here we go. Big 10 today. Big 10
Swirl
today. Here we
the
go.
numbers.
Andre Bobek, good to see you.
Pick a number.
Pick a number. Come on.
Today's number is
Come on.
9.
Fuck you. One off. One off. A ton of you went 7. Look at this. You 7, 7, got a 7. Oh my god. Everybody went 7. Baldy McNose hair with a 6. No, it was a 10. It was a 10. Or sorry, it was a 9. It was a 9. I guessed a 10. David Lynch. Just teasing me with that. That's what that is. That's just a tease, is what that is. Right? 9 is an upside down 6. Did anybody actually say 6? No. So what's the... Oh, wait, Baldy McNose hair. Baldy McNose hair. You get an inverted win. Let's just say it. Yeah, pound sand, Lynch. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Fucking guy. Fucking guy. So... Worth reporting, Socialist Action plus MSA, which is the Municipal Socialist Alliance, demands free public transit at Broadview subway station. This is an initiative that that Socialist Action is pushing forward as they move towards these upcoming elections. I am fully in support of this organization. If you are in the city of Toronto and you see the Municipal Socialist Alliance on your ballot, please consider voting for them. Honestly, like, transit should be free. It absolutely should be free. Like, you want to increase economic movement, you want to increase economic growth, make transit free. Dude, Radio Halifax, you have like 4 different YouTube names. It's ridiculous. Oh, this was a really interesting article. This one's from the Broadbent Institute, right? So this is actually like pretty technical, but I think gives us a pretty good picture of what happened over the pandemic period in terms of prices and labor and all of this. Yeah, too bad, Rusty Shackelford. Too bad. I gotta get more consistent. And I'll say this right now. One of the other things that I'm doing, if you look into the description, you'll find that there is a way to join a server. And in fact, I'll actually go copy and put that right in the chat. If you want to, at 8 o'clock, I'm going to start doing call-ins. If you have something that you want to talk about, if you have something that you want to discuss with me, starting at 8 o'clock, we're going to jump over to the Discord, and I'm going to start chatting with people as they're in the Discord. Let me know if you want to participate in that. I'm opening that up to the public. You don't have to pay a thing, right? Just it's something that I'm going to start doing, and I've got all the technology up and running to be able to do it. So, the economic shock of the pandemic inevitably caused a lot of economic irregularities, such as spikes in unemployment, acute losses in productivity, coupled with short episodes of increased spending, and unstable price changes experienced in Canada and around the world. Over the past 2 years, in particular, this instability has enabled record profiteering under the guise of reacting to inflationary pressures. Price inflation is a phenomenon of economic growth in a capitalist economy, an indicator of more activity being added to an economy. Typically, this means the value of goods and services increases, and under normal circumstances, the price of labor in the form of wages rises too. In the context of COVID-19 pandemic in Canada, however, the price of everything else has increased at an accelerated pace, while the price of labor has not kept up. While others have rightly pointed to corporate profiteering, adding fuel to the pandemic's inflationary fire, stagnant real wages, a measure of wages adjusted for inflation, have also contributed to the affordability crisis and cannot be ignored. The consistent gaps between Canada's inflation rate and wage growth rate since the start of the pandemic reveal much about today's affordability crisis. Canadian wages have not kept up with inflation throughout the pandemic. So, what we have here. The green line, so this is January 2019 to July 2022, right? The growth rate percentage year on year is your y-axis here. Unemployment rate percentage seasonally adjusted, right? So your weekly wage growth rate, that's the green line. And as you can see, right, wage growth rate on lead up is fairly stable, spikes right up because of the CERB that comes in. So everybody had a spike of increased wages, which of course plateaus downward. The CERB is then removed and wages crater, right? The wage growth rate craters downwards and then steadily recovers back to where it began at the beginning. The inflation rate, on the other hand, somewhat stable, drops down at the start of the COVID period and then now has spiked up. And in my view, this follows a very simple line, right? That we keep inflation stable, right? Big crisis happens, so prices drop because no one's buying anything. So prices drop to incentivize people buying stuff, right? Then the COVID period ends. They start jacking prices. Why? Because people have a nest egg of wealth that they were given because of the CERB, right? So they jack prices in order to get that nest egg of wealth away from the public. That's what I'm seeing. So, and the unemployment rate, of course, follows the trend perfectly. While average wage growth seems to have increased during the first pandemic lockdown in March 2020, this average is skewed by the loss of hours among low-wage workers. This trend was also accompanied by a massive increase in the unemployment rate as well as a short period of time that flirted with economic deflation. While those that were forced out of the labor market were temporarily sustained by the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, wage growth continued among higher income earners and prices remained stable over the course of the first year of the pandemic. These trends have come crashing down as CERB is removed and low-wage workers return to jobs. During this time, many workers returned to jobs with lower wages than before, while the inflation rate blew past the Bank of Canada's target rate of 2 percentage points. Since the summer of 2021, wages have not kept pace with inflation, and a sustained wage inflation gap has brought the cost of living to a new crisis level. As the negative gap between wages and inflation persists, the real wage and purchasing power of the working class is weakened as the price of work is kept low. In recent months, we have seen Canada use old-school monetary policies to raise interest rates in a bid to reduce inflation, primarily focused on housing sector prices that make up an increasingly unaffordable part of the consumer price index basket. There are some indications that this has helped to cool prices in the buyer's market, though not enough to make housing truly affordable, and has been accompanied by increases in rental market prices. Furthermore, it is a policy tool with limited effects on fighting unstable energy prices and grocery store profiteering. This is the home price index, as you can see. I love that, like, we're still supposed to buy into this idea. Oh yeah, housing prices came down. Don't worry, everybody. Housing prices came down. Like, fucking look, they essentially double, right? They from 2012 to 2016, right? They don't double, but it's an increase of like 60%, right? And then they stabilize a little bit, and then from 2020 to 2021, another like 50% is added on. So from here to here is literally a doubling in the space of 10 years, right? Like, this is unsustainable completely. This is unsustainable completely. That policy choice can also lead to stagnant wages, a higher unemployment rate, and greater inequality, especially when interest rates are increased without increased public investment. After more than 2 years of being hailed as heroes throughout the pandemic, healthcare workers' wages have been left behind, with some nominal wage growth in other sectors. How are we supposed to staff hospitals and clinics if healthcare workers can't even afford groceries due to falling real wages? Wage growth has not kept up with inflation in most job sectors. Not surprisingly, finance and insurance are fine, right? Fucking assholes. The educational services, but as we can see, right? Q2 growth rate. Unique from previous recessionary episodes is the historically low floor for interest rate that we saw after the 2008 recession and the initial months of the pandemic. As interest rates are raised to cool inflation, will governments use the still comparatively low rates to make investments and ward off the negative effects of an increasing price for money? Using monetary policy alone to tackle some CPI indicators is not enough. Without redistributive policies, monetary policy alone can be detrimental to employment and wages. In addition to tackling profits through windfall and wealth taxes to fight inflation elsewhere, we need to increase the price of labor. Governments must raise minimum wages to keep up with inflation, invest in decommodified housing, empower unions to defend workers' wages, bargaining rights, and ensure healthcare workers are not left behind after years of fighting on the pandemic front lines. Yeah, and because they took losses during the pandemic and want to make up for it. And by losses, we mean still record profits, but not as absurdly high as they expected. Exactly, yeah. As long as the line goes up for the billionaire sociopath capitalists, exactly, right? Exactly. That's all they care about. That's all they care about. And we can see it everywhere, right? We can see that these guys are psychos. This is from The Intercept. This is just a headline. I don't have the full article. But CEO says he's been praying for inflation because it's an excuse to jack up prices. As corporate profits reach record highs, Iron Mountain executive tells Wall Street inflation is great for the bottom line. Like, they don't give a shit about us. Like, they don't care at all. And the true danger of what's happening is that the ruling establishment, that the current skin that the machine is wearing, is essentially handing an election platform to the furthest right elements in the society. So essentially, the liberal hand of the capitalist death cult is essentially giving to the fascist wing of the capitalist death cult exactly the ammunition it needs in order to run a credible campaign and gain power. You can see that happening here in Canada with Pierre Poilievre. That all, like, the fact is that the Liberals and the NDP are doing nothing. They're patting themselves on the back for getting the most meager dental care package limped through Parliament, while people can't pay for their fucking grocery bills, and being told constantly, "Oh, don't worry, we're gonna raise it. We're gonna get it," and it's not happening. Right? And if it is happening, it's happening to such a small degree that the average Canadian doesn't notice it. Right? Our rent is going up. Gasoline is going up. Everything's going up. Yeah, exactly. I still cannot wrap my mind around how accepted this absurd idea has become, that you can fix runaway inflation, a symptom of a fundamentally broken economy, by simply fiddling with the knobs of monetary policy. I'm more or less of the opinion, Transylvania, that they know it's not working. They know it's not going to work. That they're just trying to create a counter narrative, right? Like, that's what we're seeing the death cult do over and over again. Like, they're not interested in trying to inform the public about what's happening. They're interested in simply creating a counter narrative that sounds technically accurate, that sounds good. And the average Canadian will just be like, I guess that makes sense, because the average Canadian has no idea what's going on, right? And it is a ludicrous level of mystical, superstitious thinking. It's a death cult. Like, it's a death cult. Like, we call it a death cult because it has a ludicrous level of mystical, superstitious thinking. That's how it thinks about itself and the world around it. And if you actually start to analyze it accurately by insisting that we take a look at material reality, that's communism. And communism always leads to famine. 100 million dead go communism gulags. Like, that's what happens. Because it's not a rational mind that you're dealing with. We are dealing with a religious death cult. And you can, like, think of how irrational the Christians, the evangelical Christians, are when you get to talking to them about the nature of their belief. And think about that, and then apply that exact type of thinking and that exact type of brain to neoliberals, because it's exactly the same. There's no difference. It's a continuous thinking. And if you were to bring up to them, even like so entrenched in their religious belief thought pattern, that if you were to point out that what they are doing is just a religion, that the first thing they'll do is just scoff and try to laugh you off, right? Because they cannot buy in to the idea at all that what they're doing is non-scientific, non-evidence-based, not entrenched in reality. It is a religious system that they have created to be couched to look like and appear as though it is scientific and appear as though it is rational. And because the system is so insular and excludes any type of externality from it, they've created this language around these ideas that sounds scientific and sounds technical, but is exclusively and strictly a religious ideology. And perhaps the first generation of people that created this religious ideology of neoliberalism didn't necessarily believe it. But now we're looking at true believers. Now we're looking at people who genuinely think that this is how the world works, in spite of all of the evidence, facts, and any kind of material analysis whatsoever. And when you take a look at these guys, and I'm talking about like Nobel Prize winning people like Paul Krugman, like I'm talking about like the highest level people. When you actually look at their work and you see what they are seeing, you can tell that either they ignore or they simply have never read Smith, Ricard. They definitely have not read Marx. Like, that's definitely not on the table. And so they're not literate, right? They're not literate. Like, I don't call it a death cult as an insult, although I'm sure that they would take it as an insult. I call it a death cult because that's what it is. Because it's strictly, the entire basis of its ethos is feet planted, rooted in a religious ideology that does not reflect reality. And the outcome of the following of their religious ideology is the heat death of the planet. Like, it's a death cult. There's no other language to use to describe it. And if you've got Fraser Institute, Oxford, Berkeley, Harvard, right? If you've got these places on your resume as like economics department, all that kind of stuff, you're a religious ideologue. There's no, and that's what I consider you. Like, I literally will not read. Like, if I see that, oh, this was written by a guy who has ties to the Fraser Institute, bye. I don't need to listen. That's why I don't like watch a lot of PragerU videos. That's why I don't like watch a lot of this kind of stuff, because it's just like the same fucking thing. It's just another religious acolyte standing up and being like, we should worship money and destroy everything around us. Like, that's essentially all they're doing. And their greatest tool at this stage in the game is confusion. And they know that's what they're doing, right? Like, when the bailout happened in 2008, they called it quantitative easing, right? So they know they're creating layers of language to obfuscate what they're doing. They know that they're creating like a technical jargon-based language to try to ensure that the average citizen doesn't understand what's happening. They know that's what they're doing. They actively do it. Like, they will create entire like subsects of obfuscated language, and with charts and graphs and all this kind of stuff to say the most mundane possible things, right? Because they know that what they're doing is obfuscation, that they're not trying to bring clarity. And sometimes what they do, because a lot of these guys are true believers, right? But it's a false, like it's a false ideology. It doesn't work. And so what they do is they try to bring clarity with this analytical jargon-based structure, but because it's based in nothing and it doesn't actually work, right? They've just got to create larger and larger and larger layers of complexity in order to attempt to justify a system that's failed by default. Like, because it can't be a failure. I've dedicated my entire life to it, right? It can't possibly be a religious ideology. I've lived my entire life believing that it's a science, when it's not. Like, neoliberal capital is not a science. It's a religious ideology. Oh yeah, many of the Nobel Prizes are such a joke. Economy is one of the worst ones, but the peace ones probably take the cake. Well, and the Nobel Prize for economics is especially bad because it's not actually part of the Nobel Academy, right? Here's a little known fact. Nobel Prize for economics. Yeah, for God's sakes, they're giving it to fucking Ben Bernanke, right? Come on, give me the Wikipedia. Is an economics award administered by the Nobel Foundation, although not one of the 5 Nobel Prizes which were established by Alfred Nobel's will in 1895. It is commonly referred to as the Nobel Prize in Economics. The winners of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences are chosen in a similar way, are announced along with the Nobel Prize recipients, and the prize is presented at the Nobel Prize award ceremony. It was established in 1968 by an endowment in perpetuity from Sweden's central bank, Sveriges Riksbank, to commemorate the bank's 300th anniversary. It is ministered and referred to along with the Nobel Prizes by the Nobel Foundation. Laureates in the Memorial Prize in Economics are selected by the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. It was first awarded in 1969 to Dutch economist Jan Tinbergen and Norwegian economist Ragnar Fritsch for having developed and applied dynamic models for analysis of economic processes. So it's capitalists patting themselves on the back for fleecing the public. That's what it is. Like, anyone who has actually been handed this award has been handed this award by capitalists in order to congratulate them for creating a firmer religious structure. Like, that's what it's for. You said that poor people are poor, and that is right. It's righteous and good that the poor are poor and that the rich are rich. Here's your Nobel Peace Prize. Like, that's what it's for. It's a fucking club. God, please bring a massive calamity upon the masses so I can rake in massive money. Yeah, is that what their prayer sounds like? Yeah, that's exactly what their prayers sound like. That's precisely what their prayers sound like. Like, I don't know what we need to see at this stage in the game. Oh yeah, this is something I wanted to point out, right? Like, this isn't the best of the video, but one of the things that's going around is that Alex Jones basically has been told by a court to pay $1 billion, right? Here's how he's reacting while they're reading the sentence. I think this is the best moment.
Number 1.
Told you there's 4 charges.
Plaintiff Mark Barton. A, defamation /
But remember, all of it's cap but cuppa, which they claimed I had some unfair business trade. The judge decides that. That's where it doesn't matter.
$32,600,000. Total fair, just, and reasonable. $60
But here's
million.
him at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Emotional distress damages, past and future, $60 million.
But this is him reacting to being told that he just lost $100 million, right? And I think the thing that I really want to point out with how this works and how this is that when these types of when the rich get punished, fines are not enough. That's really my big takeaway from this story. Like, Alex Jones is now going around and like talking shit about it. It's just another way for him to drive views to himself. It's just another way for him to drive more content to himself as the fucking grifter that he actually is. And it's why I don't accept fines for the rich anymore. Like, this man should go to jail, very, very straightforwardly. And the idea that there isn't jail time for rich people, it means that they don't care. Like, look at this guy.
Fair, just, and reasonable damages to plaintiff
Making fun of him.
Robert
He
Parker
just lost $1
and
billion.
against Alex Jones and Free Speech
Doesn't matter to
Systems
him at all.
and Line A and Line B
He's just
total
smiling.
$120 million.
Yeah, I just lost $120 million.
Defamation / slander damages, past and future, $25 million.
It doesn't matter to these people.
B, emotional distress damages, past and future, $30 million.
Yeah.
He just
Total
knows
fair,
that that's what's
just,
going
and
to happen.
reasonable damages to plaintiff.
And so he's just like cheering like an idiot. And this is exactly how like the fossil fuel executives will act. This is exactly how like the rich and the powerful will act if all that happens to them is a fine. If all that happens is we say like, okay, I know you just tried to kill the entire species, but you know, we're just going to fine you 5% of your wealth or whatever, right? They're not going to care. Like, they're not going to care. Yeah, because he knows he'll never pay it. He'll file for bankruptcy and then continue screaming, scamming some more millions out of his followers, selling them supplements. Yeah, exactly. Like, but that's exactly right. Like, it doesn't matter. Because the entire system is just a game to these people. If you don't see people go to jail, then justice didn't happen. And it's very straightforward. And I take a look at this and I think it's just a lesson for all of us. That as we go forward, right? Like, if the people who lied about the harmful effects of cigarettes went to jail, would the fossil fuel executives be acting in this manner? Right? It's why wage theft is the #1 form of theft. Because the punishment for wage theft is to pay the wages owed. That's it. That's the only thing that happens. Nothing extra. So if I steal $100 from my employees through wage theft, the worst thing that will happen to me is that I'll have to pay the money that I owe. Right? Well, what do you think that does? What incentivization do you think that creates? Right? If I was a business owner and I had no scruples, so if I was a business owner, I would just steal wages all the time. I wouldn't even think about it. I would just constantly be doing it. I would have it built in systemically into the structure of my business. I would ensure that I was constantly stealing wages from my employees. Because the absolute worst case scenario for me is that they'll kick up a fuss and then I'll just pay the wage. Right? And the more difficult I make it for them, the more likely it is that I'll just get to keep the wages that I stole. Because the punishment for it is a fine, and the level of the fine is only the amount that I stole in the first place. It's not double. It's not even 50%. It's not even 10% more. Right? It's nothing like that. It's literally just you stole $100, pay the $100, and a court mandates it, and so you just drag your heels in, and that's it. You're not going to go to jail. You're not going to have to do anything extra, right? Like, why would I ever not do this? So, but watch what would happen if they associated jail time with wage theft. Well, suddenly you see a lot less wage theft. Right? Suddenly you'd have a lot of situations where people were like, yep, nope, we're good. Like, I'm not gonna do that. Why? Because you'd actually be putting thieves in jail. instead of just telling them, just give it back. And is that what we do with people who do like break and enters? Right? If somebody breaks and enters and takes a television worth $500, let's say, right? And then they get caught, are they just told to give the TV back and it's all square? No, they go to jail, right? Yeah. Corporations exist precisely to insulate capitalists from personal legal consequences. Yeah, yet you can't put a corporation in jail. The only conceivable case a capitalist actually goes to jail is if they steal from those even richer from themselves. That's exactly right. Yeah, you can steal from the poor, but you can't steal from the rich. And and also like the reality of a corporation, like when corporations came into being in the first place, they were intended to be temporary. That the state understood that there were some projects where it was worth saying to the people involved in the project, we need to insulate you from legal calamity, considering the scale and difficulty of the project that you're involved in. So you think about building railways, right? That how it used to work is that the government would give out a corporation license to a group or an organization of capitalists or individuals, which essentially says to them, like, any legal repercussions that come your way will hit the corporation and not you. Because we know, like, not only do we know that there's going to be difficulties in regards to the requisition of labor, the requisition of resources, these sorts of things, but we also know that you're going to be blowing shit up. We know that you're going to be going onto other people's property. We know that there's going to be legal difficulties. We know there's going to be legal difficulties. But if we don't actually say to the people who are actually putting forward the capital and doing it, that you'll be protected from personal legal repercussion, we know that no one will ever do it. But we want the railway built. And so we're going to guarantee that. But once the railway's built, then the corporation will dissolve. And many of the early corporations were dissolved in this way. That the corporation existed to build the line, but then it wouldn't persist past the building of the project, and the project itself would revert to the state and then be administered through the state. But then this is where it gets so fucking scummy, because everything I just stated right there isn't like scumbag, right? Like, it's kind of shitty. Like, it's shitty that the state would say to capitalists, like, yeah, blow up what you want and steal what you want. Like that they know that this is going to happen. But it gets really shitty when, I believe it's the 14th Amendment, the amendment that was put into the Constitution in order to abolish slavery. Well, lawyers started to use this amendment in order to argue and justify that corporations are also people, that they have legal personhood. And so, like, literally the society is so shitty that we use an amendment to the Constitution that was intended to free black slaves as a justification for turning these temporary corporations into permanent institutions. And that their corporate personhood allows them to get away with a lot of shit that they wouldn't normally be able to get away with. All right, guys. We've hit 8 o'clock. And as promised, who's in here? Nobody. Nobody in the voice chat. So, it's just me again. Oh, just a reminder, if you'd like to call in, if you'd like to participate and have a chat with me, just head to the Discord link. Should be in the description. And let me know. You can ask me anything, talk to me anything, do anything you like. But until such a time, the working class isn't who you think it is. Now, what I find to be interesting about this, right, is that, here, I'll just read it and you'll understand. If in the context of the 2015 federal election, Canadian politics became fixated on the middle class and those hoping to join it, then the new and emerging fixation seems to be the working class. Everyone is talking about it these days. So there is no middle class. Like, if you look at a chart at the distribution of wealth in Canada, there's no such thing as a middle class anymore, right? That doesn't exist. Wealth distribution, Canada. It doesn't take very much to see. Like, where's the middle in this? So that should be here, right? That's the middle. Where's this middle class we're talking about? Well, you don't really get to quote unquote middle class until you're at like the 7th or 8th percentile. Super in the middle, right? Super middle. Nope, you're not here. All you got to do is join here, and I'll do it again. Copy. Seems like some people have difficulty with this. And all you got to do once you get in there is double click on the voice channel. Doink doink, and that should get you in. Real clean, real easy. Your name will show up right there. These political developments cause one left-wing economist to ask, will defining working class be the 2020s version of defining the middle class? But there is no middle class, right? Everybody's working. So creating these separations, right? It's a way for the capitalists to split us up and divide us, right? Blue collar, white collar is a way to divide the working class. Middle class, working class is a way to divide the working class, right? If you are working for a wage and you have an owner, you are in the working class. And what the capitalists are attempting to do is they're attempting to take that divide, the very clear, clean divide of owners and owned, and they're attempting to create divisions amidst the working class so that the working class will fight amongst itself. Or, if not fight amongst itself, that the working class will come to believe like, oh, there are different classes that I can ascend, when in reality there's only two classes. And that the divides that exist between those classes are manufactured by the capitalists in order to continue having us fight. Here we go. This is Eric from the East Coast. How you doing, Eric?
I'm doing good. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clear as a bell, bud. How you doing?
Actually, not too good. Well, as you know, I've been dealing with COVID. And for those who doesn't know, I've been diagnosed with COVID since April 28th, and I have long COVID, which basically screwed my life royally. Today, I tried to kind of moving some branches around, and that just simply took my energy right up. I couldn't even do it for 15 minutes.
Wow. So you've got long COVID then, for sure.
Yeah.
Are you talking to doctors regularly about this?
I do, and like I have been like researching that topic a lot. Like just yesterday, I was listening to a doctor's interview where this doctor specialized on this kind of infection disease, and she said that when the pandemic started, she knew that there will be this like 30% of the population who gets COVID will get long COVID, and is going to be
30%.
30%.
30%
of all COVID cases.
Wow.
And this doctor, she was saying that at the beginning of the pandemic, she tries telling the CDC that you will have this big population who will be dealing with COVID for a very, very long time, and they just simply ignore her.
Wow. And to me, that sort of explains what's going on in kind of the wider economy, because not only, like, one of the things that doesn't get brought into the conversation at all in regards to labor statistics or what's going on, like when we talk about the Great Resignation or we talk about the quiet quitting movement that's going on, well, what's never brought into the conversation is a bunch of people died, first of all, so there's a labor shortage because there's literally less workers, but then also there's a bunch of people who are still suffering the health effects of getting COVID in the first place.
Yeah, like there are people that after 2 years, they're still dealing with COVID. Like the thing that literally shocked me is that long COVID impacts your brain, lungs, heart, and liver.
Yeah. Eric, do you have an article that, while we're talking about this, is there something you'd like to put in the Discord that maybe I could show? Right now I'm just showing the Chinese walk-around video because I think I really like these things. But
well, the only thing I have is a video, and then there is a book that is coming out in December.
Okay.
This doctor, he actually specialized with long COVID, and he's bringing out all the data, the research about long COVID, and it's all being brought into a single book.
Do you happen to know the name of the book?
Just let me bring up the.
Yeah, don't worry so much about that, but keep us apprised of that, because I think that's really what's lacking in the conversation right now. I think that one of the things that's going to be No, go ahead.
I don't actually have the name of the book, but I do know. Like I just have to look up the name of the doctor, but I'm pretty sure I can easily find the name, and he will. In his channel, is actually a specific YouTube channel, and he talks about the kind of research and what the topic of the book is going to be.
Yeah.
And if I can just post that link, will give you.
Transylvanian is writing, "It's so ridiculous and such a sign of a fundamentally brain-broken society that there are still so many people who are COVID denialists, insist it was never a big deal, or some hoax, etc." Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Like, and to me, the big walkaway and the big takeaway from the COVID period is this recognition that there is no trust in the society, and that huge swaths of the population, like I don't think it would be inaccurate to say as high as 20%, if not higher than that, simply are deluded about what happened over this COVID period. But at the same time, I do think that the knife cuts both ways on this, because I do think that there is more information coming out in regards to the pharmacare community, the pharmaceutical community and the pharmaceutical industry, that they saw the COVID period not as a health crisis, but as a profit-making moment, that they cut corners and skimped on things. I think that it is legitimate to say that exists. And that all fuels more and more of the mistrust that exists in the society. And it's frustrating to me that this COVID, it's like we're just supposed to have forgotten about it. It's like our political class basically just has said, okay, it's over now. Get back to work. Forget about the crisis. Forget about the just put it behind us, right? Just put this in the memory hole. Never bring it up again. Never talk about it. And if you have any skepticism towards either the government or the pharmaceutical companies, then you're the same as people who are saying that it never happened in the first place. Like, and this. Sorry, Eric.
Actually, I just coughed, but I just posted the the YouTube channel of the guy who's been writing the book on the Discord. His name is Gaz Medinger.
This is.
But yes,
So.
This guy, like as I said, he's an actual doctor, and he's been researching. He's been on his YouTube channel. He's been talking about the long COVID, and he'll be publishing a book with all the latest research in December. I'm planning to getting it.
Oh, very good. Well,
And for me, go ahead.
I just subscribe to the guy. The part of the difficulty, of course, that's of what's happening is that it's difficult to know who to listen to. You know, it's difficult to know. There's so many voices in the conversation, and it's difficult to. And it seems as though there is within the conversation, like, so what is it about this fellow, this Gez Medinger, that has convinced you that he is a voice worth paying attention to on this issue? Why am I supposed to trust this fellow?
I trust him in the sense that he actually used like, what is the science, what is the medical research, like the all the like the people who actually studies the impacts of COVID. What he does, he just brings all that data and just kind of like presents to the people. And a lot of time when people talk about COVID, they only talk about like the death rate and whether or not it's deadly. But that conversation about the long-term impact, that conversation is non-existent. And very, very few doctors like this guy actually discuss the long-term impact, and he actually shows other physicians who discuss that topic.
Yeah, as I'm going through his video anthology, that looks to be what he has done, right? And then, what's so funny about him? He's like, he's got like a headline: ivermectin, the wonder drug for long COVID, the role of MCAS in long COVID, the interactive journey into MCAS in long COVID. But then he's got 10 reasons why Cobra Kai is the best show on Netflix.
Yeah.
But how to not wash a DeLorean? But it does seem that like 2 years ago, this guy was like, or maybe 3 years ago even, he was more about like cars and stuff like this, and then he gets involved in the COVID conversation because, and it does look like, as you say, right? He's got Dr. Boone Lim. How bad is the COVID tilt test? Fixing your autonomic function in long COVID. So there's something of a pivot that happens with this guy. Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's the pivot is that he got COVID himself.
Oh, sure.
He got long COVID for himself, and he realized how devastating that long COVID gets. But that conversation, it is not happening in the media.
Well, and how little information there actually is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you really have to dig in, and I could find the odd little doctors here and there who actually discuss it. Like for me, like I've been seeing like doctors, nurses, and different like healthcare professional. These people are fully aware of long COVID. Like I say to them, like, I have long COVID. If they have this is impacting me, they know exactly what I'm talking about. But if I go to the average Joe in the street, they have no sweet clue that long COVID is a thing.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like I myself really only heard about long COVID from you. You know, if it wasn't for knowing you and your regular appearance in the chat, I don't think I would even be aware of the existence of something like long COVID and how serious and debilitating it actually could be. And if you're telling me that as many like as and I mean I think that this is mainly speculative, that you've got like the source is like a single nurse that you've talked to, but even if the number was as high as 10% of people who have COVID would also be suffering from long COVID. That's a significant health crisis that it seems to me we're mainly ignoring. And I think a lot of that has to do with what Transylvanian is writing here, right? Transylvanian writes so many testimonies and thousands upon thousands of videos of people dying in hospital beds. So much research from countries on totally opposite sides of the current geopolitical conflicts. And yet there are still millions that insist it was all just a big conspiracy to take away their rights to what? To go to the Waffle House or for the few weeks of lockdown? Just so we don't have to be slightly inconvenienced. Many of us are perfectly willing to sacrifice 1 million of their fellow citizens, millions more to long COVID. A deeply antisocial society, the very concept of solidarity, seems to have become anathema to the culture we live in. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, funny enough, the person that actually kind of like gave me the statistics of 30% COVID, all that jazz, it was actually Socialism for All. He actually has multiple videos of where he actually goes through long COVID.
Interesting.
On his channel.
Now, Socialism for All, a really, really great resource. Socialism for All. I, of course, misspelled socialism. That's great.
If you hang up on your tinfoil hat friends.
The tinfoil hat friends, I'll have you know, friend, we are not tinfoil hat. In fact, we're quite the opposite, I should say.
But by the way, I have my headset on, so he cannot hear your reply.
That's
cool.
How do I do a search? I know that there's a way to do that. There it is. So if I type in COVID, you're right. He has done like about 6 months ago. He did a couple of videos. It looks like heightened risk of COVID reinfection, long COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 3 videos that he did.
Excellent. Well, because
go ahead.
Well, I just think the thing that's funny, like, I shouldn't say funny, but the thing that is, like, I wonder how much of the conspiracy, like, certainly those conspiracy-minded people exist in the society, but I do wonder how much of that is just being presented to us and being funneled in through the media in order to get us to hyper-focus on the conspiracy aspect of it instead of focus on the reality of it, right? The conspiracy theory narrative has long been used by like the CIA, right, to deflect away from the reality of certain discussions, right? That conspiracy theory is always used as a deflectionary tool. And meanwhile, in the US alone, there have been nearly 100 million confirmed COVID infections, and that is likely a vast undercounting, as many people will have never gotten tested officially. Yeah. And like, is there this very serious unreported long COVID crisis that's happening, and because it doesn't, it's just people who are tired. It's just leading to like exhaustion essentially. These people are just being cast aside and not being respected as having a serious mental or serious health situation.
Yeah, it's like those who has long COVID, there's some people who has is more severe than others. Like I know some people. There was like this 30-year-old woman. Like it was like one of the videos, socialism for all, where she actually had to get a heart transplant because of long COVID
What?
while she was in her 30s.
What the hell are you even talking about? That seems very. That seems excessive. That seems crazy to me. The idea that there's
That's
this. Go ahead.
that's the thing is that the long COVID, it is the like yes, the degree of severity depends from person to person, but in some extreme cases, like that woman, it does happen. Like another thing is common. Your brain, the mass of your brain shrinks by 10%
This I
due to
have
gray
read.
matter.
Yeah, I have read this. That like and losing 10% of your like that's got to have like a very significant like
Yeah,
impact. And how many
it's
people
like
like is it possible to be suffering from long COVID? Is it possible to be suffering from long COVID and you simply like and perhaps you're not exhausted, but perhaps you are experiencing this like decline in your mental faculties and you're just kind of not aware of it. You're going through life and you have this diminished mental capacity and you just are like, well, I guess that's just part of being older, I suppose. You know?
uh, I actually have a diminished mental capacity because of COVID, besides the physical aspect. Like when I tried doing what I call like brain brain focus, like I have to use my brain, or like let's say driving or writing papers, that kind of things. Um, I only can do it so much before I can do a migraine. The more it requires brain energy, the more severe it becomes. Like the other day, as a mock that I was trying to do, I was trying to write an essay under an actual time limit and I would write a subject and it would be graded all that jazz with my tutor, so on and so forth. And was only able to do it for 10 minutes, and the migraine lasted for 6 hours. And I have to go like in the dark, turn off all the lights,
Wow.
and wear sunglasses for 6 hours. That was how severe that migraine was.
Yeah, and we've got Transylvanians still writing. So we're looking at minimum of tens of millions of long COVID sufferers. The life expectancy will likely drop severely in the next decades, on top of the effects of climate change, the economic collapses, and even if you were a person who just cares about money, not people, think of all the healthcare costs that are being incurred as a result. Even the imperialists who want to be able to compete with China should care about this, because the West will lose the technological race even harder as a result. And Adam writes, not long COVID related, but if you're 60 to 69 and have 4 doses and get infected with COVID, you have a 1 in 370 chance of dying. This is an extremely conservative figure. Yeah, I mean, like, it's almost like the Earth itself is saying to the species, is saying to humanity, you got to slow down. Like you gotta slow the fuck down. I'm gonna release this shit into the environment and slow you lot down. Like not only is it going to kill off a bunch of people, right? It's the people who get it have a high chance of having a debilitating long-term, I don't know, disease, like affliction, I guess would be the thing to call it. And
I will call it. It is a virus, but it will be a disability. That will be like I consider myself disabled
yeah, I
because
mean,
of
if
it.
you're telling me that you could only really participate in any kind of mental activity for like a half hour, like that's like you can't work under those circumstances. Like you can't have a job under those circumstances. And it just seems to me like the lackadaisical attitude that we now have in regards to COVID essentially ensures that we're constantly going to be dealing with this affliction. And I think, as Transylvanian is right to point out, that if you view what we're doing as a competition, then it means that we're going to constantly be perpetually falling back. Like, I really do wonder, like, we're experiencing a decline in birth rate. We're experiencing a decline of the population. We're literally allowing viruses to just sweep through the society and not only cull, but also debilitate and disable large sections of the populace. Like, at what point do we start to actually say, like, are they doing this on purpose? Are they just intentionally disabling the citizens of their own country for whatever reason they have in their stupid little fascist brains?
Like for me, like the people, like at this point, like I don't care if you agree with the death rate is like 2% or anything like that. I really don't care. Like, I lost all respect for those who denies the existence of COVID, especially for the people like myself who's been dealing with it for like it's going in it for 6 months now.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you could be like that I find to be very shocking. Like, in the city of Toronto over the COVID period, and it has persisted, the largest protest movement that was in the city of Toronto was the anti-vax movement. It was the people who were denying the and you would talk to like random people within that protest, and they wouldn't be straight out denialists. They would have arguments, but if they would have you go and talk to people that they considered to be leaders, that they would consider to be leaders, and the leaders would all say, every single time, would always say, they would always say that COVID didn't exist, that was part of the leadership.
Yeah, like
stupid Mike.
I actually know some cases that there are people who are in the ICU dying from COVID, and they will refuse to acknowledge that they have COVID.
Yeah,
it has to be something else.
That's incredible.
Yes, I understand the whole government cannot be trusted. I understand. I understand there's the mass media. Because, and I understand that the whole concept that it is really hard to know who you can trust and who you cannot trust. But if you have a lot, like the vast majority of doctors, nurses, who's been dealing with that kind of things, and they all tell you that COVID is real, there's a point that you have to accept a certain action is true. And the one thing that baffles me about the whole freedom movement is, if you actually look at their favorite people, like George Washington, there was a plague that was happening during his presidency, and he actually sent troops to lock down an entire town, and no one was allowed to leave that town. They were not allowed to go outside of their houses, anything like that, for months. And yet the same people says that lockdowns are infringement of liberty, but they will preach George Washington, one of the greatest authors of liberty.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, to me, it's like a sign of the childishness of the society, right? Like, it's all well and good to say, like, oh, you should be able to do what you want and all this kind of stuff, but at some point, you need to, like, reality needs to assert itself. And the difficulty, I think, that what we are facing in the West with these kinds of issues, and I think Transylvanian, again, like, you're really on point with your commentary here, right? A big problem is that when all of this fallout of the failed pandemic response becomes too evident to deny, they will blame it on the vaccines. They've already started, which further undermines our ability as a society to respond to future pandemics. And people will outright refuse lockdowns, vaccines, etc. There's just zero left in the liberal institutions. That's exactly right. That to me is the big flashing red flag in all of this, is that we don't have trust in any institution because the institutions have become untrustworthy. And so when we are put into a position where we need to actually trust our governments and trust our institutions, huge segments of the population, rightly, are going to refuse and are simply not going to participate because they've seen the wolf. They've seen the boy cry wolf too much, and and to me, it just all comes back down to the hard reality that we currently live in an oligarchy, that the entire structure of our institutions and the entire structure of our society have restructured itself, not for the health and well-being of the society, not for the safety and security of the society, but for the personal fortunes of 10 men. And if we don't address that issue, if we leave that issue aside, then issues like COVID and issues like personal safety in a pandemic period will simply never be addressed, and simply never will never be able to respond rationally to it. Because at the end of the day, the oligarchy doesn't give a shit if you get long COVID. It doesn't care if you die. It doesn't care about any of that. It wants its exploitive machine to continue extracting as much wealth as it possibly can. That's what it wants. And
I do want to push back a little bit. I know, yes, the vast majority of Western countries is sure not trustworthy, and the analysis is correct. I do know that places like Sweden, they do have a far greater trust in their government than we have in North America, and we can see that in Sweden, their approach for COVID is the vast majority of people listen to the guideline, the guideline that the government set out without reinforcement, and they still respected those guidelines for the majority of the population.
yeah.
But places like that, you have social democracy for over a century, and the people were able to get all kinds of benefit from the government.
Yeah, if you have a cohesive society, if you have a society where it cares about itself, like, to me, that's the difference. Like, it doesn't, like, Western society,
exactly,
like America and Canada, the society does not care about itself anymore. It minimizes everything down to the individual. There is no conversation or any kind of conversation whatsoever about collectives, collective action, groups, within how we think about everything. Everything is a you problem. We're constantly reading articles where the authors are saying things like, oh, there is no systemic solution and we shouldn't focus on systemic issues, and it's actually not the material conditions. No, in fact, it's you. It's your mindset and your quest for meaning that needs to be focused on instead. And in this kind of atomized, alienated society where we're all busted up from one another and we can't actually trust that the person next to you is going to do as you do, and there is no institution that we look to in order to find stability or security, then how does this fucking work? How does this actually work any longer? And
Yeah, and I do want to point something out as well. Like the yes, the West has been focused on the individual basis, on an individual or the individual, and you just ignore the collective. Even places like Sweden, that kind of mentality is starting to get corrupted, where the I'm not sure if you've been following the Sweden government. The recently they had an election, and the new government is a far right coalition parties, where the way that they're dealing with the welfare issue, like the individual programs and whatnot, like the race stagnation, the neoliberalism problems that they face, they will blame the typical thing from the right wingers to foreigners, the people coming in the country, the Muslim, all those people, and as a way.
That's what we're seeing with this white replacement theory, man. Like the white replacement theory stuff. That's exactly what it is. It's a way to scapegoat immigrants. It's a way to point the finger at minority groups as the issue, right? And it's very scary that like large scale institutions like Fox News are able to actually say out loud and propagate these ideas of white replacement theory with almost no pushback whatsoever. Like it just
and yes, and I do agree. And even then, the places like that about the collective, there's also a collective mindset. They will use the argument like, well, the reason that you're not making as much in your EI or your welfare programs, all of that, is because of immigrants. So in order to get more of your welfare, so we should stop giving that welfare to them.
Yes, exactly. And that's just like a toe in the door, right? Like if we can strip welfare from them, then we can strip welfare from everybody. And
exactly.
Like these kinds of conversations, I keep having these kinds of conversations, and it just is like things are spiraling so desperately out of control where we can't trust institutions. Again, Transylvania really articulating my thoughts here, right? They are untrustworthy. They have failed us time and time again. They are corrupt in very many ways, but we still need them. That's the problem. We need a way to mobilize collectively. And they've done the same with regards to climate change, made it a problem of individual responsibility, with concepts like individual carbon footprints shifting the blame from corporations to consumers. And it seems as though these things are spiraling so dramatically and so quickly that the only solution that seems to be on the table that has any legitimacy is for people to gather en masse and begin surrounding the halls of power, to begin causing problems and issues directly with those individuals who have power in the society, at least theoretically have power, at least theoretically are in positions of authority, which is the political establishment. That when I take a look at the Occupy movement, like the only real criticism that I think I will levy ever at the Occupy movement is that they were in the wrong spot, that they should have been at the White House, they should have been in the halls of Congress, they should have been surrounding those places. But at the same time, I mean, I understand that what they were trying to do is is create a class conversation and make a class distinction and point out where the real power structure in America actually lives, which is the financial parasites, right? The Wall Street. And it just seems to me that we're in a position as a populace where things are only going to decline and decay further unless we actually gather together and begin to mobilize collectively. And anything short of that seems to just be killing time before time kills us.
Yeah, like I actually make the argument that there's 5,000 people in response to climate change. The first kind is the people denies climate change is real. They're the climate deniers. The second kind is like, yeah, well, climate is real, but climate change has been happening for thousands of years. So it's like, meh, yeah, we recognize it, but it's not a big problem. Third kind, well, it is a problem, but the free market is going to solve it.
Yeah.
Because money solves
Or
everything.
Yeah.
The fourth kind,
money solves everything.
Or
exactly. That's my roommate that you're hearing.
Hello, roommate.
nothing says solve the home. Like a big boat. We need a
The fourth kind. The fourth kind is the people who's like we need to mass mobilize, get everything. We need to basically change the system completely, but we need to collectively make it happen. The fifth kind is like we need to prepare for the worst. The system is not going to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
and you can see. Go ahead.
I think that's a pretty accurate assessment, and I mean, Transylvanian, of course, in regards to mobilizing collectively, easier said than done. A lot of organizing needs to happen before that will be possible, and the response from the system will be brutal.
Yeah.
Crackdowns, mass repressions, fascist terror, massacres. Yeah, I think that that's actually accurate, and that the system itself is, the militarization of the police alone. The fact that we all stood by and watched the police get militarized and just kind of had like a shrugging apathy towards it tells you that the populace seems Rainer Shea has a lot of articles on a Substack about how we need to be prepared for the civil conflict to come, and these conflicts seem inevitable at this stage. Like it just seems as though it's not going to be possible for the society. And what's so foolish, in my view, about all of this is how senseless it's all become. It's like we just want to fight that, and we simply don't need to. We simply don't need to. Like we have all of these resources. We have all of this land. We even have systems that have been put in place that we can benefit from. And with very small alterations, we can create more stable systems and more stable societal outcomes. We're just choosing not to do it. We're just choosing not to do it. And to me, that's the great tragedy of this whole situation, is that it seems as though we're deciding to self-implode. That even the most basic conscious individu and group of people would understand that what we're doing is harmful and that we're doing it to ourselves. And we just appear to be a deer caught in the headlights, unable to even imagine or get out of the torpor of sort of the horror of the situation that we're in. And I think it has actually like broken people's brains. I think that there is a degree of that has happened. That the truth of the situation is so horrific that people can't even contemplate it. It can't get into their consciousness. And so their brain just breaks from it. and they just fall into this false reality, like the QAnon movement, like that it's easier for these people to believe that there's this cabal of demonic evil forces that are coming together to manipulate world events. That's easier for people to believe than what the truth fundamentally is, which is that we're ruled by a bunch of scared psychopathic monkeys with nukes who don't know what's going on and moreover don't care to know what's going on. I think that that's the most important part. It's not just that they don't know, it's that they don't want to know. And even though they're in a position where they should know, they would prefer to just look out for themselves. And everything they do funnels from that position. Adam writes, the good news about a totalitarian fascist state taking over is that peak oil and the climate collapse is real, and societal collapse will be a shoo-in under such a system. So it won't last long. Thanks, Adam. That's some good old silver lining stuff. So, Eric, I am going to thank you for your participation, but I'm going to put you muted now, okay, bud?
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks for chatting with me, bud. I really appreciate it. All right. That was Eric, longtime viewer. You too could join into the chat. If you just saw that and you think to yourself, oh man, at 8 o'clock, John's letting people chat with him. Very simple way. Just ask for the link, get you on in. We'll have a chat. It's also nice for me, right? It's nice for me to reach out and actually hear voices and touch base with you guys. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters. Antonio Gramsci. Yep. One of the reasons why I consistently go back to the China walk-around videos, and the reason why I'm constantly enthralled by these, is that it reminds me that a new world is possible. That we can erect a different system, that something new can be born. Because what exists here in China simply didn't exist there 50 years ago. It was simply a different place where the cities that they erected over this period of time were not there. That the institutions and the structures that exist there were not there. And that it is possible for us to move in such a way with expediency and purpose in order to build something anew and create a better world. And that while things might seem hopeless at the moment, never forget that it is in the interest of the oligarchy for you to fall into hopelessness and despair. Because with hopelessness and despair comes inaction. And the inability to get up off your couch or get up from under the weight that has been placed upon you and take to the streets. Because fundamentally, taking to the streets is an act of great courage, but also an act of immense hope. That you aren't doing it because you think that we are doomed. You are doing it because you think that we can avert the catastrophe that is in front of us. And I myself, I say it over and over again, I will always believe. I will always believe. As another pandemic sweeps through, as the deserts spread, as the famines begin to mount, as the wildfires burn down our communities, I will always believe. Because the solutions are there, directly in front of us. We don't need to create things. We don't need to make things. We don't need to sell a product. We simply need to stop and allow the earth to heal itself. Because always remember and never forget that you are a quantum being living in quantum energy. These billionaires are trying to spend hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes that you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.